like to get everybody's attention if I could. It's actually 6:30 and we're supposed to be following our normal protocol here for meeting operation, and it is 6:30, so I'd like to call the meeting to order. And before I do the rest of my welcoming comments, I'm just going to go through our normal opening process.
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
No, we can't.
Okay, sorry, I guess I wasn't talking into the mic. The Township of Blackburn-Matheson acknowledges the Abitibi-Annisinaabeg Nation traditional territory. We live, play, and work here together, and together we shall build a strong and inclusive community. Just a reminder for all in attendance that the meeting is being recorded and will be distributed on the municipal website for those that wish to view or review the evening's events. So just so everybody's aware. Our next item that we have to do is a confirmation of agenda, and I need a mover and a seconder from the table. I got Councillor Drewer and Councillor Gaddard.
Moved by Councillor Drewer and seconded by Councillor Gattary that the agenda for the special council meeting of May 26, 2023 be approved as printed.
All those in favor of the motion? Seeing no objections, carried. I'll also ask if anyone has a disclosure of pecuniary interest or any general nature thereof. Seeing none, we'll move on. There's no minutes, no delegations. We're moving to new business. And now I'll give you my opening remarks. I'd like to welcome all for taking the time out of their Friday evening to actually come out here and become educated and be able to get the questions answered that they all likely need. And I would like to say that that is actually a very positive thing, that our council is very happy to see people interested in what is going on instead of ignoring it. So thank you for attending. And just a few little housekeeping items. This meeting is important for people to have the opportunity to learn or to get answers for their questions. So I would very request that everybody remain very respectful tonight and that keep their questions in line with the topic of discussion tonight, and let's try to avoid anything that's disrespectful or a couple other terms I was going to use, but we'll just stay with that. Just maintain respect so that we can make it through the evening. And if anybody, we're also going to open. I'm going to introduce our moderator shortly. But it's very important that we maintain decorum here at this meeting, so that we can keep the meeting flowing and get the information people want. And that if anybody happens to decide that they don't want to be respectful for the evening, then we'll probably have to ask them to leave. And if they refuse to leave, then we'll lose the opportunity to have this meeting. So please, let's do this right. I plead with you that this gets done correctly so that we can all move along and get the answers we want. And at this point, I'd just like to introduce our moderator for this evening's event. One of our close neighbors, mayors, Mr. Peter Politis. I'd like everybody to welcome Peter. Peter's going to be our moderator for tonight. Peter, thank you. And I'm not too sure. It's probably best this time that I just let Peter's actually going to run the meeting from here on. So from this point forward, I'm just going to turn the mic over to Peter and let him outline the rules of the night. And this way it'll be done the proper way.
Thank you, Doug. Good evening, everybody, and what a great turnout, actually. When you look at the Township of Matson, which is comprised of a lot of wards, I was kind of surprised when I walked in and saw 6 wards. It's a quick reminder of how complex this region really is, this area, this municipality, and that there are a lot of different complexities that are associated to how costs are managed and run that are different here in Matheson than they would be in other places. So before I get into the details here, you get a presentation from the clerk. Just a little bit of background on myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Peter Politis. I'm the current mayor in Cochrane, 3-term mayor. This is my 3rd term. I run a management consulting practice that specializes in strategic thinking and advanced strategic thinking, and I've provided integrity commissioner services as well too. So this is not new to myself, and it's not new to your council. In fact, I'm pretty excited by the opportunity. I really appreciate the council having confidence in inviting me and giving me an opportunity to join you in what I find is a very fascinating discussion. I think you'll find by the end of the evening that what's taking place here in Matheson really isn't unusual, though it is unusual because of the amount that the tax increase was, I think you're going to find a lot of municipalities following suit in the not too distant future. It's a very challenging time for municipalities right now, and a lot of historical decisions and directions are kind of catching up with all municipalities at this point. So take advantage of the opportunity to have a chance to speak to your council and recognize that when you're having this discussion, this is about you, the public. This is about your council, your municipality. This is your chamber too. So don't be shy about asking your questions. Recognize that this is the beauty of where we live. These are the opportunities for you as the public to give answers to your questions, and you deserve answers to your questions. Your council's not hiding. They've called this meeting. They haven't been forced to hold this meeting. They're here to face the public and to answer the questions the best they can. So let's remember a couple of things as we do this, okay? First and foremost, I've never been one to be hung up on how people speak. Speak how you speak. All right, whatever makes you comfortable, speak how you speak, so you can ask your questions. It's more important that you're comfortable to ask the questions than it is that you're following formalities and you're speaking a certain way. The only thing we ask is you recognize that the only thing that's not on the line here are people's integrity. Whether it's your integrity or whether it's the integrity of the people you're speaking to. No matter what our questions are, we don't have a right to attack somebody's integrity. Try to appreciate that your council doesn't make difficult decisions like this intentionally to hurt people. They're well-intended, they believe they're making the right decisions. This is your opportunity to ask questions and become aware, and to decide for yourself whether you're comfortable with those decisions or not. So we don't need to attack integrity, we don't need to attack people and to get those answers. We need to be respectful. And one of the things that has worked for me over the years has been to think of somebody who you highly respect in your life. And before you ask your question, ask yourself, how would I ask that person this question? And if you follow that pretense, I think you'll find that it'll be much easier for you to ask the question and ask it in the right way so that we're not crossing any lines. The other thing as well too is, some of you may be aware, and some of you may not be aware as well, that there are rules around how council meetings are held. So this is an official council meeting, it's a legal proceeding. There are rules by which your council and yourselves have to follow. One of the rules that's hard for people to understand is what can be spoken to in open public session and what can't. The reality is, the premise of all this is the public's business is the public's business. The challenge with that is the public's business is not the public's business if it requires disclosing information that can hurt or harm people or put the municipality in a difficult legal position, because ultimately they have to represent your liabilities as well too. So when you ask a question, I'll help you understand whether it's something that qualifies for open session or whether legally it has to go to closed session. If it goes to closed session, there isn't a public discussion on it. But what we do is we frame as much as we can around what can be disclosed and what can't. Now, having said that, the vast majority of what you're going to ask is going to be okay to speak in public session. You can't ask questions, for example, around personal identifiable issues that are personal identifiable in nature. So you can't ask for salaries, you can't ask for personal information around people themselves. You can't ask somebody to disclose information that's personal private to them publicly. You can't ask questions that would put the municipality in a difficult legal position or challenge any legal directions that would put the municipality at risk for having a strategic advantage, for negotiating on behalf of the municipality and so on. Those are all high technical terms for recognizing that if the question is going to put the municipality in jeopardy or expose somebody's personal information, then it can't be asked about. But everything else can. And we're going to try to work our way through that. And as you ask the question, I'll try to help you, if it doesn't qualify, try to help you frame it in a way that it does, so you can get an answer to what you're asking, okay?
Introduce the council and the staff, because not everybody knows them.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'm going to get you the rules here, and then I'll let the clerk take over, and she's going to have a presentation along with the CAO, and then they can introduce the council to you. So that's a very good question. Appreciate that. Thanks. So the rules have been laid out tonight are the moderator will read all questions pre-submitted and advise which question will be read and answered. So there's 3 questions, 3 people that have submitted questions. One can't be asked because it is personal in nature, but the other 2 can. I'll start with those once the council's done their presentation, and I'll read the question, and then the council will answer those questions. And once we get through those, then it will be open for yourselves to ask questions, okay? Then the public must raise their hand and wait to be acknowledged by the moderator. This is how a council meeting runs. You can't have everybody talking at the same time and so on. So if you have a question, raise your hand. What I'll typically do is I'll look at you and I'll nod. If I nod, I've got you. Okay, so then we'll go and turn around, folks, and we'll come back and we'll ask you what your question is. The public must make their way to the front here and state their name and address, and should they want to share a brief introduction. Okay, so you can come up and grab the microphone so everybody can hear you. You're going to address the council, and again, we're going to ask the questions in a respectful manner. The public must ask a question and wait for the moderator to allow the question to be answered. So you're going to ask a question, just give me an opportunity to kind of think about it with you, and then if it's allowable, I'll let you know it's allowable. If it's not, then again, we'll try to find a way to frame it so that it is. If we can't, we can't. At the end of the day, just accept the fact that not everything can be asked in open session, but the vast majority can, so let's not get too caught up on that. Questions that will not be permitted are information related to individual staff compensation or overall packages. Again, those are protected by law. It's not an elective on the council saying we just don't want to answer that. Ongoing legal matters or any ongoing matters currently closed, as I mentioned earlier. And should the moderator require clarification if the matter is closed, he will seek clarity from the mayor and the CEO. Okay? Any questions on the rules and how we're set up here for moving forward before I hand this over to the council? Yeah, go ahead.
What happens if you have to let the public know about the public meeting? I thought we were an hour ahead.
Okay, so that's a good question to ask when we get to the question and answer session. Okay, that's actually a really good question to ask. So when they do their presentation and you see what's there and they're done making their presentation and I come to ask the questions, I'm going to answer those ones that are written. There's just only a couple of them. And then you can be the first question right up front, okay? Then you can come up and you can ask that question. Brandon, what's your name?
Steve,
Steve? Okay, Steve, is that fair?
absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Steve. All right, Sandra or Chris, are you doing the presentation? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Cassandra Child. I'm the clerk treasurer with the Township of Black River Matheson. So as requested, I'll introduce council for those of you who may not know which council represent your ward. I'll start over here. Ward 6 is Councillor Kim Drewer. Ward 5 is Councillor Louise Gattery. Ward 4 is Councillor Alana Schmidt. The Mayor, Doug Bender. Councillor Chantal Rondo, representing Ward 1. Councillor Keith Neal, representing Ward 2. And Councillor Dave Diamond, representing Ward 3. With us here tonight is Chief Administrative Officer Chris Ray, sitting right here. And next to Chris Ray is Han Ji Lee, the Executive Assistant to the CAO. Okay, so if you can't hear me throughout the presentation, just let me know. Tonight we're going to go through the 2023 budget and look also at the multi-years for the next 4 years following this year. So before we start, what everyone needs to understand is the multi-year budget is one of Council's most important financial documents and policy. The budget is a cash flow exercise. So it reflects the amount of money required to be raised in order to support the levels of service determined by Council. Once completed, it sets out the roadmap for the current operating year, and it's intended to help position the municipality financially for upcoming budget years. So we'll start off looking at the revenue sources for the municipality. There are 3 sources of revenue that the municipality brings in. One is grants. So grants are broken out between conditional and unconditional. What that means is some grants have rules around them, where other grants don't have rules around them and can be applied however council sees fit. Apart from grants are user fees. So these are fees that are collected based on individual services that are provided by the municipality. And finally, then there's taxation revenue. So all 3 forms of revenue are reflected in the 2023 budget and the multi-year budget. So the purpose again of the budget is to determine how much cash flow is required to be raised by taxation revenue once we apply all the conditional, unconditional grants and user fees. So let's look at unconditional grants first. So again, those are grants that don't have any rules attached to them and can be applied to the budget however you see fit. So the only unconditional grant that's left is called the OMPF, that's the acronym that we use. It's called the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. Again, it's the last standing unconditional grant that we receive from the provincial government. Since at least 2016, Black River Matheson has been losing 1% of this unconditional grant every year. Back in 2016, 1% of your budget reflected $40,000. So which meant every year, when we would start budget deliberations, right away council would have to find an extra 1%. This year, in 2023, we're losing another $31,100. In the multi-year budget, we're using this historical data as the trend to forecast out that we're going to continue to lose 1% each year. So conditional grants. These are grants that we have to apply for, and these grants have rules around them, so we can only use that money for specific purposes. The 2023 budget actually reflects quite a few of these grants, and we'll go through them and I'll break them down for you. Again, user fees. So user fees are imposed on the individuals who are requesting that specific service, and we'll go through what those user fees are. So what this slide shows is the different forms of revenue broken down. As you can see, the municipality, like most, rely heavily on taxation revenue. In the 2023 budget, we are relying on $6,540,738 to be collected in taxation revenue in order to support the projects that council would like to see through in 2023. The conditional grants, which are grants we have applied for and successfully received for specific projects, add up to $2,805,000. Unconditional grant, again, the OMPF, which again has no rules. Council applies that money directly to the operating budget. And this year we're anticipated, well, we will be receiving $1,296,100. And finally, user fees. We're anticipating to collect approximately $881,388. So I just wanted to focus a little bit more on the OMPF, again, the grant that has no rules. And I just wanted to show how since the year 2017, there's been a slow decline on how much money we receive yearly. So now we'll talk about the conditional grants. Again, these are grants that have rules around them. So one is called the Canada Community Building Fund. Some of you may remember it as the gas tax fund. So every year, Black River Matheson receives $154,643. What we can apply that to are items such as public transit, wastewater infrastructure, solid waste management, community energy systems, local roads and bridges, capacity building, highways, local regional airports, short line rails, disaster mitigation, broadband and reconnectivity, brownfield redevelopment, culture, tourism, sport, recreation, and fire halls. So our current balance starting on January 1st, 2023 was $1,058,052. In the 2023 budget, we are going to be using $960,423 of that in order to support infrastructure projects that council has pointed out that they'd like to see done. So these are the projects. Council would like some hot patch work done in front of Bingham Memorial Hospital, on Main Street, and in Valgagne. They'd like to see the culvert replacement done on the corner of 8th and 2nd in Matheson. The sidewalks on Main Street, they'd like to see them done. The highway design. So this ties in when it says municipal portion of highway design. So the municipality was actually fortunate enough through a grant application to receive funds for a highway redesign. But what you need to understand is when you apply for a grant, it's not always 100% funding. Rarely do you see 100% funding. A lot of the time, they'll only fund up to a certain percentage. So whatever the difference is, the municipality has to pay for it. In this case, the municipality has to pay, I believe it's 10% of that grant. So instead of asking the taxpayers to pay the 10% that council has to put in for the grant, we are going to use the gas tax fund to fund that portion, which is $75,000. We were also successful in receiving a grant to do an arena retrofit at the Matheson Arena. So again, that wasn't 100% funding, and the municipality has to pay a portion of that funding. So that funding will be supported by the gas tax, which is $222,193. When looking at all the details of the arena and the grant that we did receive, there are some additional costs that have come up. Those additional costs will also be funded by the gas tax program. So another conditional grant that we receive yearly is called OCIF. It's called the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. Black River Matheson receives on a yearly basis $91,236. So the eligible capital expenditures that you can spend this money on is capital construction of new core infrastructure, or capital maintenance, or debt financing charges. So again, very specific on what you can spend it on. Our current balance, so on January 1st, 2023, our balance in regards to this grant was $23,371. The 2023 budget reflects an allocation of $46,000, again, because we're receiving the $91,236. And what the municipality has been spending this grant on is the engineering report for the Valgagne and Monahan Road. The last conditional grant that the municipality receives, it's quite new. It's a grant right now that the provincial government says is only going to be sustainable for 5 years. That may change. However, our yearly contributions for 5 years is $103,054. And again, it's for investments in local infrastructure. So our current balance is $213,840. We are going to be using $198,490 of that money this year, as we need to replace the public works gas tanks. So these are other grants as well that's reflected in the 2023 budget. Every year, the library receives close to $8,000, which is applied to general operations. FedNor, so I spoke about it quickly a few minutes ago. We were successful in receiving a grant to do a highway redesign here, and that grant was $675,000. Through Infrastructure Canada, we were successful again in receiving another grant, as I mentioned earlier, for the arena, and that grant amount is $888,768. And finally, we've applied to the federal government to help us with funding for our summer students. We applied for $22,000 in funding. User fees. So again, as I mentioned earlier, 3 forms of revenue for the municipality. 1 are grants, 2 is user fees. So these are fees, again, that are imposed on specific services. So we'll break it down per department. In recreation, we charge for gym memberships. The municipality actually does very well with their gym memberships. On a yearly basis, you collect anywhere between $20,000 to $30,000. Arena signs. So this year, we'd like to restart the program. around the arena floor to be able to put signs there, along with signs outside of the arena. The arena concession booth. So this is an operation that hasn't been running in a few years. We'd actually like to put a tender out for anybody to put in a bid to run an arena concession booth during the winter season. Arena ice time. So we collect fees in regards to individuals renting the ice surface, such as minor hockey or private rentals. And again, upstairs hall at the arena, that's always available to be rented out. It can be rented out privately or to any group. Administration. So in administration, we charge for tax certificates. We charge for marriage ceremonies and licenses, along with lottery, dog, and business licenses. Planning fees. We also have investment income. I'll touch on that really quickly. So the reserves that everyone speaks about. We have those invested in with one investment with LAS. So those investments receive interest. That interest revenue, we apply directly on your operational budget. We'll go through that later on, but you can appreciate that as you draw from your investments, so our reserves, you also miss out on investment income. So our investment income this year has been budgeted around $200,000 based on our current balance and projected use of the reserves. Penalties and interest. So there is revenue to be generated on delinquent accounts, and we budget for those, be it for water or for taxes. Sale of municipal property, and also public sale. So we do have some pieces of equipment that at the public works that we anticipate we can make some money on in regards to a public sale, so that will be occurring later on this year. For the library, at the library we charge for rent. There is penalties and interest to be made on books that are not returned on time. Sales of books, administration fees when it comes to using the printers or asking for printouts, along with donations. Actually, the library is really great. People do enjoy using that service and do contribute donations. The museum. So, council did make a decision to close the museum. However, I'll speak on it. While the museum was open, there were memberships that we would collect, donations that were received, and through the terms of reference of the museum committee, one of the items that we were tasked with in order to help offset the cost of operating the museum was to put on fundraising activities. In the fire department, so we collect money when it comes to fire permits, issuing 911 signs, fire charges, and highway fire calls. Bylaw, so I'll get into it later on in this presentation, but council has reinstated the bylaw position. So with the bylaw officer, there is money to be generated through the building department. There are building permits where we receive revenue for, animal control penalties, and parking tickets and fines. In cemeteries, so as you all know, we have many cemeteries in Black River. We have 7 of them. With the 7 cemeteries, we generate revenues through the sale of plots, burial fees, foundations, and care and maintenance. And finally, with the landfill, tipping fees. So what this chart represents, again, because we're focusing on the revenue, is how year after year, we're relying more and more on taxation revenue to help offset the expenses and continue to fund the levels of service. So the taxation is actually the blue bar. OMPF is the orange bar. It's hard for you to see, but again, there's a slow decline in the OMPF. Grants are the gray bar, and you cannot rely on grants. You're hopeful when you apply that you'll receive them, but recognize there's potentially 444 other municipalities also applying for that same grant. And finally, other, which represents your user fees. We are attempting to increase the use of our user fees to help offset taxation revenue, so that is definitely something we're looking at in 2023 and future years. So if you look at taxation revenue and the different tax classes, As you can see, 49% of the taxation revenue comes from the residential class. After the residential class, we rely on pipeline. 31% comes from pipeline, and after pipeline, it is commercial at 12%. So in order to remove the burden of taxes from the residential class and shift it onto other tax classes, we do have to bring in 1 more homes, 2 more of a commercial base, and 3 more of an industrial base. So now that we've gone through the revenue, we'll look at the expenses. In the budget, there are 2 types of expenses. You have operating expenses, which usually generally tie into maintenance, and they're continuous in nature. And your operating expenses include transfer to reserves. Capital expenses. So your capital expenses tie into a betterment of the current asset or a purchase of an asset. Based on our financial statements and our financial policies, a capital expense is anything over the threshold of $5,000, so that's condition number 1. Condition number 2 is if it's a betterment to an asset. So this is the breakdown of your operating costs by department. At 36% is public works, transportation services. You have a very large road network, 400 kilometers of road. So you can appreciate how there is a lot of expenses that goes into maintaining that. After transportation services is your operating grants. So in the budget exercise, whatever you recognize in revenue, you need to recognize in expenses. But again, as much as it's a cash flow, you need to balance. So your operating grants actually take up 18% of your budget. After that, it's provincial costs. So these provincial costs, you actually have no control over it. So 14% of the entire budget, you have no control over. These are costs attributed to DSAD, Porcupine Health Unit, and OPP, along with MPAC. You have no control over that, you must pay those fees. And again, that ties up 14% of your budget. After provincial costs, it's general government, so administration. That takes up 13% of your budget. In administration, items that are reflected in there are insurance, legal expenses, the cost of running 2 municipal buildings. I'll go through it in further details. We also reflect the entire reserve transfer in administration. So the reserve transfer actually supports all of your departments, but we reflect it solely in administration. 5% reflects your recreation and cultural services. 2% reflects your environmental services. Health services is reflected by 0.4%. And planning and development is 1%. I'm going to go through each department though in much more detail. This was just to provide you with an overview as to how your operating expenses are broken down per department. So this exercise was just to show everyone that if hypothetically you pay $1,000 in taxes each year, when you pay your taxes of $1,000, what's it going towards? So the breakdown of that is $130 of your $1,000 is going to administration. Operating grants, $180. Provincial costs, $140. Fire services, $40. Protection to persons and property, that's bylaw, that's $20. Transportation services, which is public works, $360. Environmental services is $20. Health services, $10. Recreational, $50. Planning and development's $10. And we do have some long-term debt, which I'll give you in details in a moment, of $40. So now let's look at each department. General government. We have an overall increase in general government of 24% from 2022 to 2023. 6.8% of that has to do with inflation. We have an increase in municipal insurance. The municipality's municipal insurance took a really big hit back in 2020, I believe. It went up 130%. And unfortunately, that's just the market. There's only so many insurance companies that will bid, if you will, on municipal insurance, which are 3. And so unfortunately, in order for us to have insurance, we have to pay those costs. So the municipality actually pays on a yearly basis $230,000 for insurance. There was an increase in council and staff training budget. In relation to council, you can appreciate with the new council, there is a little bit more training to be done. So there was an increase there. When it comes to staff, we do have new employees that do require some training, so the budget was increased there. And again, as I've mentioned, general government reflects the reserve transfer. So the reserve transfer, though, supports all departments, but it's strictly reflected in administration. Provincial costs, again, costs that you cannot control. That went up 3.5%. Porcupine Health Unit increased their costs. Social housing increased their costs. Ambulance and social assistance. Fire services, there was an increase of 8.8%. Again, a portion of it has to do with inflation. There's the demolition of the old Raymore Fire Hall and the communication tower relocation in Raymore. Protection services. So reinstating the CBO bylaw position. Transportation services. There's an increase of 50%. It contains inflation. It also contains engineering costs for a new public works building, which is very much overdue. Fleet study. So the fleet in public works is also at risk. Because fleet pieces of equipment have not been replaced as requested by staff to historical council, our maintenance costs have increased. So our maintenance costs has increased by 50% from 2022 to 2023. Last year we budgeted $250,000. This year we're budgeting $500,000. So now what you're battling, or if you're fighting with, if you will, is you're fighting high maintenance costs, and you're also trying to now purchase new pieces of equipment in a market where the interest rate has gone up. There's an increase of 82% in the gravel program. So for many years, a gravel program was not followed. How it was addressed was a number was given, and with that number, the municipality was to purchase gravel. It was never enough gravel, so your roads, your rural roads have really deteriorated over some time. Council this year asked that we address at least 1/3 of the rural roads. So in this budget, we've reflected gravel for a project, if you will, of 1/3 of your urban roads. So gravel for 1/3 of your urban roads is $760,000. Bridge report. So in Black River Matheson, you have 20 bridges and 9 culverts. It is a requirement that every 2 years you do a report on all your bridges for maintenance and replacement. The report was done in pieces, if you will, a year or 2 ago. And prior to that, the reports weren't done as often as they should. So your bridges have been neglected. And because maintenance hasn't been done on your bridges, potentially you're going to be looking at replacing your bridges. One bridge alone to replace is $1.8 million. So in the budget this year, which costs $40,000, we are going to get a bridge report done on all 20 bridges and all 9 culverts. From there, council will be given a plan on how to now address maintaining and fixing the bridges. And of course, the purchase of culverts. Landfills. So there's actually a decrease in landfill operations of 18%. Last year, 2022, between 2021 and 2022, council asked that we revisit the operations of the landfills. The operations were being done were being contracted out at one point. And so with the changeover, we've now brought in some of the work in-house, and it's actually costing taxpayers less money to operate the landfills. Health services, so this has to do with cemeteries, worker bees, and Bingham Memorial Hospital. So there's a decrease of 48% from 2022 to 2023. Council asked that we remove the hospital rebate. What that rebate was a rebate for their water and sewer. So every year, taxpayers would fund $14,000 to Bingham Memorial Hospital to offset their utilities. Council asked that that be removed from the budget, along with the worker bees. Recreation, so there's an increase in recreation of approximately 13%. One of it has to do with inflation again. There's also some programming costs. So as everyone's aware, council approved that we hire a rec assistant by putting on programs that also cost money. So it costs money in regards to craft night, Canada Day, seniors bus, seniors day, and volleyball at Joseph H. Kennedy Public School. We've also budgeted for some bear-proof garbage containers. As residents know, you have multiple outdoor rinks. One of the outdoor rinks requires some shingles. And of course, the council chose to close and sell the museum. In regards to long-term debt, so when council back in 2020 purchased the building actually across the highway, that cost was $722,000, and that was actually debentured. It's a 25-year loan at 2.7%, and your annual payments are $46,000. This year, as I mentioned, what the municipality is facing is battling maintenance costs for your fleet and replacement of specific equipment in public works. So you don't have enough reserves to self-finance all the pieces of equipment that we need. So we're looking at a rotating line of credit in order to help fund the pieces of equipment that need to be purchased. Your capital budget is $2,397,943. In capital, how that's been broken out, so there's no capital projects happening in general government. In fire services, we have $493,500. Protection services is $60,000. Transportation is $1,807,480. The library is $14,000. Cemetery, we don't have any capital projects. Recreation is $10,000. The museum is $12,963. So although the museum's closed, prior to a closing, we did have some boiler issues and they had to be repaired. These costs were approved back in January, so they've already been incurred. No capital projects in environmental, and other has to do with planning and economic development. So as much as the capital budget is $2,397,943, how that's all being funded is $198,490 is being funded through grants. So again, that has to do with your NORDS grant, and that's the replacement of the gas tanks at Public Works. $1,608,990. That has to do with the purchases of equipment in Public Works, and that's going to be funded through the line of credit. And $590,463 is coming out of your reserves. So the capital budget broken down by department. In fire, we need to purchase bunker suits and a new pumper. With the reinstating of the bylaw officer, we need a bylaw truck. In Public Works, we need to buy 2 plow sanders, 1 grader, a trackless sidewalk machine, a mini excavator, and as I've mentioned, above ground gas tanks. The library needs a wheelchair ramp, front door, and a chairlift with a ramp. Recreation needs 2 lawn tractors, And then there was the boiler repairs that needed to take place at the museum. So now we'll talk about the reserves. So the reserve schedule reflects discretionary reserve funds for each department. And the reserve levels are dictated based on 5-year forecast. So every department has a 5-year capital plan, and based on that capital plan and the replacement of those assets, we can then determine how we should be funding the reserves in order to help self-finance some of those replacement costs. However, the model is no longer feasible due to several years of failing to transfer funds into these reserves and being forced to push out the replacements of departmental assets. So if council were to keep the current model, the old model, the reserve transfer for 2023 would have to be about $700,000. If that were the case, we wouldn't have gone to council the first time and said that the levy increase was 40.5%. We would have went to council and said the levy increase is 55%. So we knew that this was no longer sustainable. So should council tolerate the new proposed model, which they do, and they've accepted, we can continue to purchase the capital items that are required to be purchased in 2023, and we only have to do a reserve transfer of $100,000. So what this looks like is, this is the old model, if you will. So the old model shows that the 2023 purchases were $2,397,943. Based on that, and keeping all of these discretionary reserves, we'd have to transfer $708,000. But you can see as even transferring $708,000, certain reserve discretionary funds would still be in the negative. They still wouldn't have a positive balance, which means you'd be taking then more from your working fund reserve and eventually depleting it. So we recognize that couldn't be done. So in order to try to rebuild the reserves and try to self-finance some of our capital replacement, what we've done is we've combined all the discretionary reserves that can be combined, apart from the reserves that have conditions against them. So all the reserves are now in what we call the working capital reserve. So not each department has its own reserve. Apart from the worker bee reserve, because through terms of reference, they require their own fund. And same with the COVID-19 Safe Restart Reserve that was provided by the provincial government. It also has to be separate from our discretionary reserves. So based on this new model, we're able to sustain purchasing everything we need to and only transferring $100,000 into the reserves, and at the end of the year, we'll be at $2.4 million. So what is the impact on taxpayers when we increase the tax levy by 34.2%? So 34.2% means we require to collect an additional $1,656,527 in revenue in order to support the levels of service that council has determined. So when we set the tax rate, council only controls one side of that coin. Council controls the tax rate, but they don't control the assessment. The assessment is controlled by MPAC. So at MPAC, they assess classes of property, and they provide current value assessment to all properties that will be weighted against for property taxes. So current value assessment everywhere in Ontario still reflect values from 2016. MPAC has yet to do a reassessment cycle based on current value assessment. We have not been told that it will be performed in 2024. So we are setting tax rates based on assessment values done in 2016.
That's a video. Can you play it? Yeah. Just double click and see if there's.
So here are the tax classes here in Black River Matheson. If we look at the very first tax class, it's residential. In residential, we have 2,511 properties. By imposing an increase of 34.2%, the average property will see an increase in taxes of $324. However, of the average change, some properties will only see an increase of $52, where other properties will see an increase of $4,589. And as you can see from the breakdown, as I've mentioned before, 49% of the taxation revenue comes from residential, so $814,112 will be recouped from the residential class. Multi-residential, there are only 5 properties in there. The average change for multi-residential properties is $2,209. The lowest change will be $1,273, but the highest will be $3,248. Okay. Commercial excess land, there are only 2 properties in that class. The average change will be $196, lowest of $186 and highest of $206. Commercial occupied, there's 140 properties in that tax class. $1,400 will be the average change. Some will see as low as $43. However, some will see as high as $19,935. So we will be seeing an increase, or we will be collecting from the commercial occupied tax class, $195,970. Commercial vacant land, there are 22 properties. The average change is $115. Some will see as low as $79. Some will see as high as $217. Managed forest, there is 8 properties. The average change is $33, with the lowest being $21 and the highest being $121. Industrial excess land, 6 properties within that tax class. The average change is $155, lowest is $50, highest is $220. Industrial occupied, there's 24 properties within the industrial tax class. The average change is $3,244, lowest being $59 and highest being $8,994. Pipeline, 2 properties of pipeline. So the 2 properties are seeing an increase of $259,510. We collect $519,020 from the pipeline tax class. Farming, there's 259 properties within the farming tax class. $128 is the average change, 58 being the lowest and 781 being the highest. The industrial on farm business 1, 2 properties in there. The average change is $541. And industrial on farm business 2, there's only 1 property, seeing an average change of $28. Our landfills will see a change of $19. So this is really hard to see, it's really distorted. But the purpose of this slide, which is available on our website, was to show the breakdown of each tax class compared to 2023 taxes and 2022 taxes. So in residential, there are many different property codes. The more popular ones under residential tax class is your single-family home, your seasonal recreational dwelling, and a farmhouse. So 2023 annual taxes for a single-family home in a residential tax class with an assessment value of $110,000, your taxes will be $1,876. Last year, for that same property, your taxes were $1,401. So the difference between 2022 and 2023 is $475.29, which is an increase of 33.9%. The properties that will see a difference of $475 are 789 properties. Again, in that tax class, there's 2,511 properties. So the 2,511 properties, 789 of those properties, which is 31% of that class, will see an increase of $475. which means the other 69% will either see something less or something more. When it comes to the seasonal recreational dwelling, so the assessment for that in 2023, the average assessment is $72,000. In 2023, for a seasonal recreational dwelling, is $1,228. In 2022, the taxes were $917, which is a change of $311. The change of $311 represents an increase of 33.9. 134 properties of the 2,511 will see that change, which is approximately 5% of that class. Farmhouse on residential. So the average assessment for a farmhouse in the residential tax class is $162,000. The 2023 taxes will be $2,763. The taxes in 2022 were $2,063, which means it's going to go up $700. So that's 33.9%, and again, 138 properties will be affected, which is about 5% within that tax class. Farmland, in 2023, the average assessment is $139,500. Applying our 2023 tax rate, the taxes will be $594.99. The taxes in 2022 were $444.30, which means they're going to go up $150. Managed forest, the average assessment in 2023 is $14,300. Applying the 2023 tax rate, taxes will be $60. Last year, for that same property, the taxes were $45, so they're going up 15%. Multi-residential apartment buildings. So the average assessment for that in Black River Matheson is $366,000. If we apply the tax rate, that means that the taxes owing for multi-residential will be $7,896.38. The taxes for those same properties in 2022 were $5,896.51. So the taxes will be going up by $2,000. Commercial. So for a small office building in the commercial tax class, the average assessment is $41,000. If we apply the 2023 tax rate, the taxes will be $1,384 as compared to last year's taxes of $1,034, which means they're going to go up $350. For small retail commercial property, the average assessment is $187,500. If we apply the 2023 tax rates, taxes will be $6,333.74 as compared to last year, where they were $4,729. So an increase of $1,604. And finally, the industrial tax class, your average assessment is $214,370. Your taxes for 2023 will be $9,620 as compared to $7,183 in 2022. So an increase of $2,436. Okay, so how did we get to a 34% increase? What everyone should remember is every time the budget is affected by $49,000, it goes up 1%. So temporary cuts to operating items that are continuous in nature, they resurface every year. The concept is the same, should operating items be funded with reserve balances? So we'll get into the details of that or into the weeds of that in a moment, but since 2019, budgets have been passed and adopted by increasing operating expenses, but not increasing your operating revenues. So in order for council to not burden the taxpayers, they still wanted to provide you with a level of service, but didn't want to charge you properly for it. So they were removing from reserves to offset those increases, or they were doing temporary cuts. But when you remove from reserves and you don't properly fund it, or you do temporary cuts, you have to deal with it the next year. Now, dealing with it the next year, it's compounded then by inflation or potentially other costs that were unexpected. So now you're dealing with something more. And now this has been happening since 2019. Another issue is failing to replace assets at the end of their useful life, which increases ongoing maintenance costs. So we're seeing that with public works. The equipment has not been replaced when the equipment has reached their useful life. So now we're battling increased maintenance costs on an old fleet, and then also dealing with trying to replace those same items within public works without enough reserves to self-finance. So then dealing in a market right now where the interest rates are high. Also failing to follow internal plans. So because they don't like the number, or the number is not something that they can tolerate, then it's then ignoring internal plans, which then comes back with a vengeance in years to come. So failing to follow plans for roads, ditching, gravel, winter control, bridges, culverts, hot and cold patching. If you don't deal with it in 1 year, eventually you're going to have to deal with it, and it turns into a much higher amount. Using affordability to set the tax rate instead of the service level. So what one person can afford is very different from the next. If the City of Toronto were to try to adjust their taxes based on what they could afford, it would be an impossibility. It's the same thing in Black River Matheson. So when it comes to setting the tax rate, what council has to be prepared to tolerate is what level of service do I want to provide to the taxpayers, and recognize that whatever that level of service is, comes at a cost. Not taking into account inflation costs. So we all know how real inflation is, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away. And setting a budget that looks good on paper, but does not reflect current reality. So when you pass the budget, you like the numbers you're seeing, but it's not the reality of your actual operation. And come the end of the year, you're then running large deficits. So in the numbers, how did we get here? This all started back in 2019. In 2019, we had a 29% levy increase. But to not deal with it, we took 26% out of the reserves. So to start back up, we had to collect an additional $1,174,995 in 2019. But council did not want to increase the tax rate by 29%. So instead, they kept everything in the budget, but chose to remove 26% from the reserves. And went to the taxpayers and said, we're only going to increase your taxes by 3.5%, so an additional $131,000. And really, they should have went to the taxpayers back in 2019 and said, we need $1.1 million. So then we turn the page to 2020. So in 2020, we're now starting off the year at 37.2%. So in 2020, we should have went to the taxpayers and said, we need an additional $1.4 million. But instead, we did temporary cuts of 22%, which is $853,000, and we took 11% out of reserves. And we only increased the tax levy by 4%, so asking the taxpayers to give us an additional $161,000, but in reality, we should have been asking the taxpayers for 1.4. 2021, now we're at 41.1%. So again, in 2021, we should have went to the taxpayers and said we need 1.6 million. But instead, we cut 26.2% from the budget, which is just over $1 million. We took we did 210,000 of permanent cuts. So if they're permanent cuts, they're not continuous in nature, they're not going to resurface the next year. And we took almost 75,000 out of reserves. And we went to the taxpayers and said, we only need 7.8% additional money, which is 313. But again, we should have been going to the taxpayers and saying, no, we need 1.6. In 2022, the levy demand was only 23%, again, because we did do some temporary cuts. However, we didn't go to the taxpayers in 2022 and said we need an additional $1 million. What was done is 13.3% was the temporary cuts. So again, you're not dealing with the issue, you're just postponing it to the next year of 13%. There was no permanent cuts done, and 130,000 was taken from reserves. And we only went to the taxpayers and said, we need 6.9% more, which is 308,000. But again, we should have been asking for $1 million. So over these 4 years, we removed $1,679,582 from reserves, and we forfeited to transfer it into our reserves $1.4 million. So when we're building the budget, Black River Matheson is really unique. We don't have one of something, we have multiple of many things. And as you all know, when you have multiple of things, it costs more money. So we have 400 kilometers of road. 25 kilometers have to do with urban roads, and 375 have to do with rural roads. As I've already mentioned, you have 29 bridges. It's broken out between 9 large culverts and 20 bridges. You have 8 cemeteries, 1 that's inactive, and 7 that are active. You have 4 water stations, a sewer plant, 3 lagoons, 4 landfills, 3 community halls, 3 fire halls, 3 outdoor rinks, 5 parks, 3 outdoor spaces, 21 other municipal buildings. Linear assets would have to do with your water and your sewer, which we haven't even addressed yet. You have 16.3 kilometers of water lines and 14 kilometers of sewer lines. And when you look at the fleet, you have 28 pieces of equipment in public works, 9 in the fire department, and 3 in recreation. So when you're setting a budget, you have a lot of different costs to incorporate. This also comes in relation to maintenance costs and replacement costs. So back in 2013, every municipality was tasked by the provincial government to draft and to adopt an asset management plan. And this asset management plan is then tied into grant funding. So these are 2013 numbers, and in 2023, the municipality is updating these numbers to reflect current numbers of this year. But back in 2023, if we were, which is impossible, but it's just to put it into perspective, if we were to properly budget for asset replacement and asset maintenance, for roads, bridges, vehicles, equipment, and pipes, that would be 395 million would be the replacement cost of all your assets that day in 2013, or $337,000 per household. Now add in your life cycle costs to those assets back in 2013. We wouldn't be asking per household 337,000, we'd be asking 978,000. So this is just to sustain the assets that exist in Black River Matheson. So as I mentioned earlier, you are going to be transferring $100,000 into your reserves. And this is to try and help sustain and replace your assets. But in reality, based on your assets you have, you should be transferring $875,000. Accumulated depreciation, which of course has to do with accrued accounting. Based on the assets, we don't budget for historical costs, which was again accumulated depreciation. We budget based on replacement costs. So based on even just your accumulated depreciation, you should be budgeting $720,000. But again, we're only budgeting $100,000. So that's it for my presentation. I believe questions in regards to my presentations will be done later on in the evening.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much, Cass. Appreciate that. As usual, Cassandra explains it a lot better than any of us ever can. Mind you, she's been doing it a little longer. And now we'd just like to turn the floor over to our moderator so that we can get on with the rest of the important stuff so people get their questions answered.
Thank you, Doug. And Cassandra, I echo that. That is probably the most thorough and competent explanation of the budget I think I've ever seen. So it's very difficult to be the messenger, as you can appreciate, folks. So let's not shoot the messenger in this case. Let's recognize the message is a difficult message and it has to be explained. That's why you're here tonight, is to be part of actually understanding the message and asking questions back and forth so you can you can properly get a conscience in terms of what you support and what you don't support. And then, of course, if you don't support something, then you express that to the council, and then you ultimately exercise your right when it comes time to elect people and decide whether you're confident or you're not confident. That's not what this is about tonight. Tonight is all about you understanding what the dynamics are, and then what the questions are, walking out of here being better informed. So there are two questions. I'm going to ask those real quick, and then Steve, you're going to be the first one, as we said to begin with, to come to the microphone. This one is from Karen Dore, or Dore. Am I pronouncing your name right, Karen? Is it Dore or Dore? Dore, I thought so. Okay. So, Karen Dore, Highway 101 East, fire pole to 2048 Matson. Question. I would like to know why the township is thinking of selling the museum. Surely there must be some other way to cut costs in our area. The museum is our history, and everyone in the community in some way or another has tied to it. What will happen to the contents? Will the families that donated their artifacts be able to get them back? We appreciate knowing why the museum is such a big expense to the township. So this is a question that can be answered, and how do you want to handle that?
Peter, I messed up a little bit. I wanted Chris to do this presentation most before.
Chris has a presentation as well?
Yeah, and I apologize, I messed up. I
Oh,
wasn't following
okay.
my agenda, I wasn't paying attention.
Why don't we, because that's been a long presentation, why don't we get to a couple of these questions here? We'll get these done, so we can get some interaction with the audience, and we'll come back to Chris, and he can fill in his presentation, then we'll come back to the audience to answer, okay? So this is a question that can be answered. Who's going to take the question? Doug, yourself, or anybody else?
You can direct them to me and I'll pass them along to whichever council wishes to handle.
And then there's a question on the table. Turn it over. Museum. Why do you want to close the museum?
Councilor Gadry would like to answer that question.
First of all, as far as the museum goes, we've been advertising for a while to get some people to be on the, for people to be part of the committee to run the museum. There has been no interest whatsoever. The only person that has shown any interest is the person that is running the museum, or that would be running the museum. In addition to that, we've asked how many people have actually been visiting the museum over the last few years. And I'm not counting during COVID, because obviously there was nothing going on then. But pre-COVID, there was like 10 people per year going through the museum. So given those facts, we felt that the museum wasn't feasible to continue with the museum.
So Karen asked, just for clarity, guys, what will happen to the contents, and will the families that have donated the artifacts be able to get them back?
And I'll answer the second part of that question. Actually, the way it's being handled is we've asked our staff, our senior staff, to put a report together to determine the best way to distribute those assets in whichever way, shape, or form, so council can make that decision. And of course, those decisions are all based on things staying status quo, but we'll be waiting for a staff report to make those final decisions as to where the artifacts will end up. They won't be just thrown out in the garbage. He's worrying about that. That's not going to happen. There'll be a staff report, come back and tell us what the proper way to deal with this, and we will.
Okay, Karen, thanks for the question. Now, Ron Coughlin, 1393 Wild Goose Road, Raymore, has about 5 or 6 questions here. It shouldn't take you long to get through them. They are very pertinent questions. Chris, they might lead into your presentation. Just be patient, because you can follow in behind with your presentation and try to fill some of those holes. So the first question that Ron asks, is the proposed levy increase related to the purchase of potential future municipal office? And if the building was purchased, was it debentured? Debentured meaning, is there a loan for that? And how much are the annual payments, and how long is the term? Who's going to take that question?
Councilor Schmidt.
Hey, Councilor Schmidt.
Thank you, everybody. So this one was answered in the presentation. The new office building was purchased in 2020 and debentured over 20 years, a 20-year term with an interest rate of 2.7%. The annual payments are $46,957. Since the levy has not been properly adjusted since 2019, you can make argument that yes, this increase regulates the revenue required to offset these annual payments.
Okay, thank you. So the next question Ron asked is year over year, 2022 to 2023, how was the 34% increase determined? I think a lot of that was explained in the presentation, and but I'll let Doug just answer the question very quickly to kind of sum it up.
Year over year, 2022 to 2023. It actually was in the presentation that Cassandra put up, but just to repeat it, basically it started in 2019. It is basically the year over year cause of the increase.
So for summary, folks, it started in 2019. She explained very well how it sort of compounded its way through. Is the office purchase cost included in the increase? If so, it should not. Only the debenture payment should be. Is the office purchase cost included in the increase?
No, the office purchase cost is not. It's the debenture portion of it, the annual amortization is the only thing that's included in that.
And Ron has got a lot of good questions here, so he's put a lot of thought into this. What is the 1% levy increase in actual dollars? Anybody remember? $49,000. What is the planned township growth? Was it taken into account when the tax rate was calculated? It's okay, we'll come back.
The actual township growth has been taken into account, although it's always something that is, it's going to depend on the economy and everything else, but based on some proper determination of planning by our senior staff, the calculation of tax rate is a direct result of failing to financially deal with the aging infrastructure of Black River Mountains for many years. And that's not just the last council or any of the last few councils. It's also part of a provincial government failure, federal government failures, the amalgamation of several municipalities with a really good, solid senior level of government plan. And we haven't been adjusting our operating revenues to operating expenses since 2019. And of course, like Cassandra had mentioned earlier, this has been also compounded by the loss of Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund revenue, which is the main grant that we operate under. And of course, we've all been dealing now with our home issues as far as major increases in insurance and inflation. So those are all those factors.
Thanks, Doug. Two more questions. Was any consideration given to spreading out the increase in taxes? For example, 15%, 10%, 5%, or 4%? As opposed to doing it all in 1 year?
And actually, Cassandra, I think, actually explained that one very, very well also. I'm just looking for my actual notes here. Oh, okay, because what would have happened if that would have been done that way now, if that would have been done starting in 2019, that might have worked. But starting now, the issue just became that the required adjustment would end up being higher at the end of the term of council due to compounding inflation and more loss of ONPF. Also, this would not take into account any unforeseen expenses. It would result in municipality not being able to offer further services and programs for the next 4 years.
Okay, last question, then we'll go to Chris's presentation. And Steve, you're up on the mic as first one asking questions, okay? From the floor. What was the main driving force that could possibly justify the dramatic increase? Now, Sandra explained that, but somebody should summarize that to answer Ron's question.
Actually, I think just my comments on Ron's previous question basically covered that, but basically we're in a situation where we either fix it now or that problem just continues to get worse because as was laid out in our presentation, last year it should have been a 23% levy increase, and it didn't happen. So now we're now into that 34.2, and only 34.2 because council made some other hard decisions to cut a few items that we probably should have been considering, but we just couldn't do any more than that. So that's basically where we're at.
All right, so we'll pass the mic over to Chris to do his presentation, then we'll come back to the floor. So get ready to ask your questions. Again, Steve, you're going to start that up. If it helps for a little perspective, like I was mentioning to you before, all municipalities are going through this kind of difficulty. I can give you our own experience in Cochrane. To sum it up a bit different than what Cassandra summed it up, we basically have a 69-year backlog in our infrastructure. Okay? That means that we could literally double the amount of money in taxes that we're charging right now to do infrastructure, and we'd still be 34 and a half years behind. It's like this right across the province, and it's because these difficult decisions were not made sooner in the process, because councils face so many very difficult challenges. You can see this reaction right now to a 34% tax increase. That's what people are trying to avoid, when in reality, it takes courage to make these decisions and to go down this path, to get you back on the right path. But Matt is not alone in this. I just want you to be aware, this is a challenge right across the province. Chris?
Thanks, Your Worship. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out on a Friday night. My name is Chris Ray, Chief Administrative Officer here. Oh, closer you go. Okay. So, whereas Cassandra sort of gave really a recent issue with respect to the budget, and particularly this year, I'm going to talk about some historical issues here that came across my desk, and frankly, as Mr. Politis has said too, these are issues that face a lot of communities across the north.
Can't hear you.
So one of the things I'm going to tell you is that the deficit was originally $1,978,000, and when we had the budget meeting with council, that some of you may have seen on YouTube, it got cut to 1,656. There we go. Okay, so just to recap, that's the chart that the treasurer had shown you, just as a reminder. And one thing that I would comment on this is that 34.2% increase, if you wound the clock back to 2019, that's about 32% of that 34. Okay. Now, I'm not going to suggest that that's the only cost. It is not. So straight roads don't make skillful drivers, and so certainly this is not a straight road that we're dealing with here. And something I want you to remember is that permanent decisions should not be made based on a temporary circumstance. The township is an ongoing entity. It's been going on since 1970 or 1969, and it's going to go on for another 20 years, another 40 years, another 60 years. It's going to be around for a long time. So the other thing I want you to remember too is we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking that we use to create them, right? In other words, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So says Albert Einstein. So when I was thinking about this, I applied the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 principle, right? So who's responsible for all this? Well, 20% of the responsibility probably has to go for the province. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The other 80% to the township. And Cassandra actually presented some of those issues in her presentation. So you got to remember, way back when the township was put together, and then it was re-amalgamated again with more land, it was a completely different world. Completely different. So just take one thing, your transportation cost, which makes up the biggest component of your budget. Back then, Province of Ontario had a specific grant program for roads. Every year, you filled out the paperwork, you sent it in, and they gave you the money. In 1995, 96, with the election of Mike Harris's government, he changed everything. That was completely pulled out, and he replaced the whole thing with the forerunner of the Ontario Partnership Fund, which was called the Community Reinvestment Fund. Very similar look, very similar results. Okay, a couple of themes. So let's talk for a minute about tax levies and fees. So there's been a historical thing here, and you see it in a lot of places, where the tax levy increases do not reflect the services that are being provided. In other words, municipalities use affordability as a guide to establish the annual tax levy. And Cassandra actually talked about that. Here, we have fees and charges, but we don't have a fees and charges bylaw where you can look and see all the types of fees and charges we have. We have a few bylaws here and there, and you have to pull them together. So we're actually actively working on a new fees and charges bylaw. And most of those fees and charges, too, are far out of date. You know, for example, building fees, that type of thing. They have not kept pace with inflation, and that is penalized in the township because the difference has to come from the ratepayers. Reserves and reserve funds, and you know, using the reserves certainly to address the annual budget deficit that Cassandra had put up there is not a best practice. It's a worst practice. And municipal affairs will tell you that, and other municipalities will tell you that. Mr. Politis will tell you that, and I'm telling you that. You can't do that. It's just not sustainable. And certainly reserve contributions that don't keep pace with your needs for your future requirements, right? Replacement costs, and add on CPI, then add on the maintenance required. It doesn't work. Using the stacked tax stability reserve without replenishing. At one time, Black River Matheson had a tax stability reserve. And the purpose of those reserves is so that in 1 year, if you have a little blip in your taxes, you take out of that reserve to push that blip down. And then maybe the next year, you put some back in. It's to smooth it out. And certainly not identified necessary reserve categories. Cassandra talked about putting all the reserves into a working reserve. I've never, ever seen that. But we're in a place where we have to do that. We should have reserves for public works, recreation, and all the departments and down the line. We don't have that luxury anymore. Staffing. There's been this expectation of municipal staff to carry an increasing load of responsibilities. And we don't invest in the necessary staff levels for training in order to do that. At some point, something's going to break. Inadequate compensation levels that result in an inability to attract staff. Our compensation levels are at the 50th percentile in the region. That means we're neither highest nor lowest. We're right in the middle. And that was based on a third-party compensation study. Our employment conditions are not necessarily progressive. We don't have policies about working remotely, although we've learned an awful lot from it during COVID. So these things we have to put into place. In the past, Black River Matheson's had a CAO, then it didn't, then it did, then it didn't. And so what happens is council by default then becomes the CAO, and they get into the weeds. And it's not their fault, it's because it was necessary. But if you have a CAO in place, train that person properly, you wouldn't have that problem. I've seen situations where we've had staff recommendations that make complete sense, and then they're just set aside. Staff understand that at times that happens. They're called political decisions. But where there's serious recommendations, they should not be put aside. And usually at the end of the day, whether it's 6 months or a year from now, you can say, well, you know, I made this recommendation, the council decided to do this. But again, that's their right. Lack of resources to do the necessary modeling. There's a question here about growth. We don't have the resources to do that kind of modeling. So then we're around in the dark during the stubborn toe. We don't have staff to complete grant applications. And certainly in some circumstances, we're using contractors instead of our own staff resources to complete things. In my mind, there's no reason why we should have to call a contractor in to replace a sink when our resources can do it themselves. Asset management. This is a huge issue. So there's been a lack of equipment maintenance that's resulted in the premature aging of our equipment fleet. If you went up and bought a new car and you did no maintenance to it, what would happen to that car in 5 years? It would be falling apart. If you took care of it, you probably would get 10 years of that car. It's the same concept. We also did not replace failing equipment, which adds unnecessary costs. Can we put a wheel on here or a transmission in here and get another year out of it? Sure, we can do that. And then the next year, it's going to be replaced anyway. So why are you doing that? A lack of facility maintenance leading to dilapidated buildings, some which are unsafe and unhealthy. The old township office is horrible. Nobody in the right mind should work in there. Now, if you dumped in a pile of money, perhaps, but then again, you got to think about things about asbestos in the walls and that type of thing, not to mention a leaking roof. And I don't know if anybody in this room has ever been in a public works facility. It is also very unkind to the workers, and it needs to be replaced, and we're starting that process now to plan for it. Sewer and water system. I've been around for 30 years, and I've never seen a sewer and water system like this here. There's 4 of them. We have fire hydrants. That's beautiful. But there's not enough pressure to drive the water through the hydrants to put out a fire, except here in Matheson. That's wrong. It's just wrong. And so now we have problems with our wells in some of the areas. The Holtire well is not in good shape. The Raymore well can't hold an awful lot of reserve. There's going to have to be replaced. And I'm telling you, that's a lot of money. Not to mention the laterals that need to be laid to run the water to the communities. And then, you know, with respect to sewer and water, the main thing that's come up lately is transite pipe. And trust me, I worked for Johns Manville when I was out of high school. I know what asbestos can do to people. Now, as long as it's inert, it's embedded in something, it's fine. It's when you cut it and it gets dusty, that's nasty. But the other thing is now what they're finding is pieces of the pipe are breaking off. They're going through the water system and they get into people's water and people drink it. Allegedly, as the story goes, it gets lodged into their system and then the asbestos does this nasty work. Now that hasn't been proven. Health Canada's looking at it and I'm sure we're going to hear lots of it soon. I will tell you, the city of Timmins has a program to replace all the transite pipe. So they're ahead of the game, and so should we be. And again, no plan for maintenance or replacement of linear assets, and that's something that we need to address. Our asset management plan is 10 years old now. It does not meet compliance with provincial legislation. We're working towards a new asset management plan, and that plan is going to push out some surprising numbers. As Mr. Politis has talked about his own community, you're going to see not similar numbers here, but the magnitude is going to be huge. You're talking tens of millions of dollars. These assets, they were put in place in a one-third funding model. A third from the feds, a third from the province, a third from the municipality. In 1995-96, that all went out the window. We're now into a competitive granting process. We have our third, but the other places don't. The province doesn't, the feds don't. So in order to try and get some of that money, you have to apply for a grant if there's a program. And if there's a program, you're in a bundle, sometimes with 443 other municipalities, and they have a number, and they judge your applications, and once they get to that number, everybody below the line gets a 0. So that's going to continue into the future until there's some change in culture there. Internal controls, we don't have a purchase order system or an inventory system. When you have neither, there can be leakage, either through rakes and shovels walking out the door or being lost. And in purchase orders as well, there's no internal control on what's getting purchased. And certainly, there's a lack of proper policies and procedures, which we are now addressing. Real estate, Cassandra talked about holding real estate that could result in cash flow and increased property taxes. We've now started something on to try and do something about that. Planning, lack of service planning, strategic, whether that's strategic, and you know, I'll give the council, the last council credit. They went to the table and we got a strategic plan done. I know these folks are now looking at doing a new one. The draft will be up for everybody to review. I would suggest in the next month or so. We have no plans for roads. We have no plans for equipment. We do have an economic development plan that we need to look at again. Our economic development work has been limited because we have a limited capacity to do that. Although I am quite surprised by the little time that we spent on that, the results that we've got, and there's some good things in the pipeline. And a lack of using available data. We have a geographic information system that's extremely comprehensive. And in fact, just this week, we ordered some new equipment so that our public works crew can do some mapping out in the community. That data is going to be used in conjunction with our asset management plan, but also with respect to our annual budget. The other guy. So we have to be careful about not dictating what we do just because somebody else is doing it. So for example, oh, what does Iroquois Falls do? Who cares? I don't care. Maybe they're doing some good things and maybe we can copy them, but I don't guide myself by what they're doing. So we shouldn't do that either. We should carve our own path. Debt. I hear it all over the place. Debt is bad, debt is bad, debt is bad. Wrong, it's not, it's good. You can use debt if it's used properly to build your infrastructure. There is bad debt, for example, borrowing money for soft services. That doesn't make any sense. But if you're borrowing money for bricks and mortar, that makes sense. Cassandra and I talked for months about how are we going to fund new equipment that we need. And we came up with the concept of partially using debt, which is a rolling credit facility. And so we haven't established what the upper number is. Once you reach the upper number, you're not using it. So the idea is on a 5-year basis, as you pay things off, you can bring another piece of equipment on brand new. And most of those pieces of equipment have a longer life than 5 years. Service levels. So cutting service programs actually devalues the community. So recreation here had fallen on hard times, and we've made some good efforts to try and increase the recreation programs in the town. We're going to need all of your help to do that too by participating. And I think we're going to have some good things coming up. Even things like improving at the arena. We've bought a new ice resurfacer that's electric. We're replacing all the ice plants. We replaced the dehumidifier, and we're going to have a solar mirror that's going to come on board, and it's going to provide energy to run the arena and save us $30,000 a year. Not $1 of taxpayer money went into that project. Not one. We also don't define our service levels. So how often should we be plowing the roads, putting gravel down? How often should we do the sidewalks? How often should we sweep? Those are going to be defined in the asset management plan that we're currently working on. Granting to community groups after the budget is done. And I know this year council had talked about it a lot, but I almost guaranteed them that after the fact, community groups are going to come as they do. So the council are going to say, we need $5,000 to this, $4,000 to that. So the secret is to try and control that as much as we can. And lastly, in service levels, technology has been largely ignored. We've made a great effort to try and change that. We've got a new website. We have now software called Laserfish, which we're going to put all our documents into. We don't have to use paper any longer. We have Cloud Pyramid for land use planning applications, for building applications. So we've made these advancements that are meant to help everyone. Risk management. There was no risk management program. So we wrote a plan, and previous council adopted the plan. This is good. But our staff are not educated or trained in risk management. I mean, I could walk around the town, just Matheson here, and point out 100 things where we've got risk. We've got to train everybody else to watch that too. The best people that we have are the people on the ground. So mostly our public works crew. They see stuff all the time. It's just a matter of getting them to recognize that, take a picture of it, whatever it might be, and then we can fix it. And in all likelihood, Cassandra talked about insurance. We're in a hard market right now. There's going to be more increases, double digit. But we're also going to see increased claims and the possibility of more and larger claims unless we get a hold of the risk management component of it. Increased claims means increased premiums. And in some cases, there was a recent case in Southern Ontario where it was a car accident where a young man was a paraplegic. No, sorry, a quadriplegic. And the settlement was $16 million, and the municipality had $5 million coverage. So guess where the other $11 million comes from? It comes from a debenture that the municipality now has to take out to pay the. So, that's a really bad situation. I would never want to see that here. Financial grants, there was no grant process. I think we pretty much got that in place. Mr. Lee and I work regularly on grant applications. Last year we brought in way over $2 million. I'm not so sure we're going to do that well this year, but we're certainly going to try. And in the past, because there's no process, then you miss grant opportunities that have gone by, and some of them frankly were easy money. So it hasn't been a priority, but it is now. Cost control programs, they weren't really embraced. There was a couple that was done. For example, your street lights are now all LEDs. Before they were the old style. That probably saved 70% of the electrical costs on those lights. Also, flying on the cheap too. This is not a good thing. I see it all the time. Oh, let's build it. Oh, no, too expensive. So let's do this. And then you run into warranty problems. You run into problems of finishing, and it just gets messy. So we can't do that. Just to buy the cheapest, it doesn't make any sense. You have to put some thought of a quality into that. And we don't have an internal program for staff. They're some of the best people that can identify cost savings, right? So if I was to say to council, hey council, I'm going to put a program in place. A staff member identifies some savings, let's say $5,000 and up, and we can do that in perpetuity. How about giving them $100 to take the family into dinner? I don't have a problem with that, because otherwise we wouldn't have that savings. So yeah, you could say, well, that's part of their job, but it's not part of their job. They're not trained for it. But if we train them for it, we can benefit from it. Outside collaboration, I have to make a correction here, with all apologies to Peter too, is that I made a statement when I presented to council that there was this ongoing representation issue with the DSAB, and that Timmins held more than 50% of the vote. I was wrong, that was corrected. Oh yeah, sorry, Peter. So, and I had to give Peter credit, because he really, I remember, I wasn't here then, but I did watch it through the newspaper, and he went to bat, and they got the change done. So that's a really good thing. So my apologies to DSAB. Lone wolf mentality. We have to realize that we're not the lone wolf. We have to collaborate with other communities like Cochrane, Iroquois Falls, Englehart, anybody up the Highway 11 corridor. There's lots of good communities that will collaborate with us. We just have to make the effort. And further to that, we need to make the effort to lobby. And I know Mayor Bender, he's big on this. I know Mr. Politis is as well. So am I. You got to build a profile for yourself. So lobby ministers. Get them to understand who you are. We don't have a profile, either regional or otherwise, and we need to build that. I think we've had a good start so far. Property assessment. Of course, everybody in this room probably knows, and I know council knows, there's been no enforcement of property standards. What happens when you do that is you send a message to potential investors that you don't care about your community, that you have no pride, but for a financial basis. If you have a neighborhood and you've got a street that does not take care of the property, their assessment values come down, right? You got a street over here, they take care of their properties. These guys over here are going to pay less taxes. These guys over here, they're paying more. So we have to get a hold of our property standards. And I think we're likely going to start in the urban areas first and then move to the rural areas. The rural areas are have less of an effect, mostly because we've got lots of agricultural operations in the area. So we've done no modeling on that either, but we're about to. Communication, I think we need to have a communication protocol for the ratepayers, also for staff, the province, Canada, our MP and our MPPs. And we have to tell everybody the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, it's not all good news. A lot of it's bad news. A lot of it's ugly, but we have to address it. We're never going to get fixed. So, not interested in profile, but more interested in smaller matters that can be controlled. We have to be interested in the former. We have to be interested in our profile. forget about what somebody's doing downtown, you know, a staff member or whatever. Let's talk about increasing our profile so that the province knows who we are, the feds know who we are, and anybody knows who we are. So that's about it. There's some themes to think about. They're historical in nature, but they help complement what Cassandra was talking about. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. So we had a lot of explanation here, guys. We patiently waited. We're almost 2 hours into a meeting here. This is your opportunity now to ask questions. If you still have holes, and you still want to fill things in. It's an opportunity for council as well to engage with the constituents and have this discussion. So remember, respect, right? We ask questions as if we're speaking to somebody who we highly respect. How would I ask that person this question? And remember that decisions that are being made aren't decisions that are being made by people who are not thinking or who are foolhardy. You can tell by the presentations here this evening. There's a lot of competent thought that's gone into it. Doesn't mean it's the thought you agree with or you may agree with. That's what this whole discussion here is about, okay? So Steve, are you still back there somewhere? Come on up, buddy. Let's kick this off here with yourself. You got a question at the beginning? You get it cracked up.
G'day folks, how's everyone doing? So my first question is regarding public meeting procedure. I know it's not mandatory to have them. Oh, I know it's not mandatory to have them, but when you're kind of throwing something quite drastic as a 35 or 4% increase to the tax levy, don't you think it would have been a good idea to have a meeting before the...
Go ahead. Hang on, did you get asked me?
Would have had a meeting before the budget delegation so you can hear the people's opinions? Addressed to Doug, I guess?
Who's taking this one?
I'll take it.
And folks, don't be afraid either. You have a large ward system here. You can address your councillor directly if you like as well.
Actually, Steve, in short, we actually had that discussion at our budget meeting. The council was 100% behind the 34.2% increase due to the nature of the problem. But as far as the council was split on having the budget vote, half of the council was pretty much split down the middle as to whether to do it before or after. But I actually broke the tie in favor of having this meeting after the budget was struck, because I didn't feel it was a good idea to sit down with a room full of people to try and figure out what could be cut, what could be kept, what could be whatever. This is the forum now to help us decide what we're going to do going forward, what's a priority or not, without too many voices. And basically the other theory I have is the 7 of us have been actually elected to represent the community and make those decisions. And I personally, like I said, council was split. And on my side, where I supported having it after, I just felt it was more conducive to a proper flow of information and having a proper decision process, and giving the public the opportunity afterwards to be explained why we're doing what we're doing, and give them the opportunity to give us information. So going forward, we can take that into consideration, especially our staff. But our staff are the experts, and they're the people that are paid to make the good decisions, or not good decisions, but provide us with the good information so we can make the call. They may not be good decisions in some people's minds, but they're the right decisions even though they're tough. That's a long-winded answer, sorry.
Let's go.
Okay, so is it fair to say, Doug, then you resolved the fact that this was a foregone conclusion because the drastic nature of it had to be done, and you took the courage to stand up and do that, and now you disagree with that, but that's what we did.
That's one humble man's opinion from a public relations aspect or look at it. That was the wrong choice. But that's one humble man's.
That's fair.
Yeah, exactly. So, lots of questions here. The next one, I'm guessing would go towards Cassandra, about in the budget numbers you had there, you're looking for ways of increasing tax revenue, correct? And in your budget chart that you had there, if I remember correctly, development and something else was 1.2 or 1.7%. Don't you think developing industry in the valid property across the road would help to increase the tax income? So more money might be needed to put towards development of our industry in the village?
So the question, I believe, is should we be spending more on development?
That's a council question.
Okay. that's
Oh,
fine.
sorry.
Okay. So which one do you want to take that?
Does anybody want to take?
Okay, Keith?
I can try to take this, see if I can satisfy. So when we look at, when we went through this budget, and something I say as counselors, when I look at all the counselors here, you can, if you talk to them, we're public servants, so you have a right to call us at any time and expect an answer from us. That's something, again, I'm definitely committed to. When I look as far as for the budget that we hit, and again, I look at how much money we're going to put out, can everyone remember what the 1% amount was for every how much? 49,000. When we look at did the roads, I don't know if anybody thinks the roads in Matheson are fantastic. It was almost $1 million to put in for 1/3 this year. If I look at for the fire truck, for the vehicles for the roads department, that's $2 million. Who can tell me quickly what $2 million at 49, every 49,000 is 1%? That's 40%.
Oh,
Right? So when we look at the numbers that were there, we got to figure where we can put things. I know that there is on council at our meetings. I know that from the CAO and things that are in the works. That's definitely something we're working at. I know one of the things that the mayor brought to the table, even on his platform, was economic development, opening up an industrial boulevard. So that's definitely things that we absolutely believe are absolutely essential, and that's something that, again, that we're going to be trying to work for. I don't know if the money, the dollar, the percent amount as far as dollars for economic development is going to be the key thing. The key thing is actually going to be working with people that have already shown some interest to come here, that we're actually a community that can actually bring them here and give them the things that they need to function.
exactly what I'm saying. Need to spend more time and effort in attracting industry and jobs to our little village.
You have one more question?
Yes, I do.
One more question?
It's somewhat of a question, more of a heads up for my fellow residents here. What's going to happen when Impact comes along and reassesses our property? I believe Cassandra said next year. I don't know about the rest of you, but I almost feel like I've just gotten a good shot in the head and in my pocketbook at some of the hardest times I've dealt with in my life, financially. Mother now did great. Anyway, so how many can we take? We are Canadian taxpayers. We already support 3 levels of government that have been overburdening us for decades. So folks, thank you very kindly for taking on the task that you have, because I'm well aware of the fact that it is a thankless, tough task. But keeping it coming into my pocket isn't the answer. And thank you very much for having the meeting.
Thank you, Steve. So the question is, what happens when Impact reassesses?
I'm not the expert in the room. The experts are actually over here, but from the old guy's perspective, basically what's going to happen when Impact reassesses, all it's going to do is the assessed value, total assessed value of the properties in Blackburn Madison will go up. But if we still need $1 million instead of it's just going to be just spread around the same way as it was, but it'll be spread around with a different tax rate. Am I correct in saying that? More or less.
Yeah, so it's a complicated thing that people confuse a lot. First thing is you've got to know G in Madison. That's pretty good. The reality is Impact doesn't raise your taxes. Okay, what Impact does is they spread your taxes out throughout the community. So the $6 million that Cassandra identified, which is what is being collected for taxes, what Impact does is through your properties identifies how much of that $6 million is going to you, how much of it's going to you, how much of it's going to you. They don't change the actual, it's the municipality that dictates the taxes that go up and down. Impact just looks at whose properties are worth more, which means you pay higher. And if someone is paying higher, that means somebody else is paying lower on the other end. So you had your hand up, sir, you want to comment? Yeah. And I've got you here as well, okay? Now I'll bring the microphone to you. Okay. Yeah, stand up for a second. I'm good here. Introduce yourself.
My name is Albert. Everybody here met me, and I want to give a recommendation to the council. Since we had our issue, they've helped us out in regards to an issue we had on our property, me and my neighbor. And they've been helping us, and we've seen some results. So Dave Diamond is taking on more on his task. So that's all we can ask for in regards to the council, is to represent the community as liaisons or whatever between other levels of government. So thank you for that. Part of my question, Steve here already addressed in regards to Impact. but I've been looking at the financials, and there's been millions of dollars of development here in this area over the past 8 to 10 years, and there's no real increase in receivables and taxes. Why is that? One, and meaning you look around, you drive up and down the road, you see buildings there, so that's increasing already property values. So with impact not coming here, wouldn't that have an increase on your receivables? Like, I see you're in a tough position here because you're playing catch up. I can't see you ever catching up in regards to collecting taxes from the residents here. So I don't know what else you can do, and I don't know if it's possible, especially in these times of inflation. But I have a question, is farmlands have a very minimal increase in their taxes in this 34%. It's not represented at 34%. So when there's so many tax farmlands being cultivated or here, it's the long-time residents that are paying the burden in the end. And I can't see that ever, what you say, and Chris put a great presentation, so did Cassandra. But there's no way you could ever catch up unless you change some of the overall system of collection, if you like. And I'm not trying to take sides. It's just about fairness and equality, if you like, right?
Those are two really good questions. So the first question is, what kind of bang are we getting for all the millions of dollars that's being invested in development? What kind of return are we getting?
Nobody wants it. Okay, well, I'll babble away again for your sake, Albert. I mean, first off, on the whole assessment process, the proper terminology usually escapes me, but there's what they call a tax fairness law or fairness rules. So you can only assess portions of tax to each class with a level of fairness. And on top of that, with the farmland side of things, the provincial government has legislated through different agencies, has legislated municipalities can only charge 25% of the residential rates towards farmland or farm buildings. Any building on a farmland other than their house. Their house is taxed at a regular residential rate, but any barn you see is taxed at 25. Say if that building's worth, I don't know, pick a number, $100,000. And your house is taxed at $100,000, and if you're paying $1,000 for your house, you're only going to pay $250 for that $100,000 barn. That's the rules that are set up by the province, and the municipality has no choice in it. And I know I've had this comment lots of times on the street. We've had lots of those $100,000 barns around. Why hasn't all that extra money shown up in our spreadsheets? And you know what? I mean, some of it has, but it hasn't made the difference you would think because of the fact that all those assessed rates are 25, or the tax rates on those properties are 25% of the residential rates, which means you need four of those big buildings to meet up with one house. So that's part of the game, and I can't explain the rest. The rest is even beyond my pay grade, sorry, which is about 13 cents an hour.
I believe you.
It's the OG rate. But anyway, so taxes are very complicated. It's not, the council does not have control to say this is how much we're taxing here, this is how much we're taxing there. They have like 0.1% impact on the actual tax rate. MPAC establishes those taxes based on what they think is a fair distribution of the wealthier paying more taxes than the less wealthy. That's the way the law is set up. You have one more question?
Okay, I understand everything you said, and I already knew a lot. I didn't know exact rates, but as I said, being that this is a community that's getting a lot of farmers now, it's not going to bode well for the long-time residents of this community. So I understand about the barns and whatever else, but there's also $100,000 buildings that are built on properties that are also businesses in this area if people look around. And it does not show on the spreadsheets, as you say.
Okay, so you're making a statement basically, which is good. Okay, that's fine. So you've been waiting patiently here. You want to ask a question?
Well, mine's more of a statement about the budget meeting, which was May 4th. The budget meeting was May 4th, and to me that was basically a closed meeting because when I read it, it was there was a weight limit to the town building. Well, I'm sorry if I'm too overweight to get into the town building. That's very offensive to me. What also is very offensive to me is that on the town website it says we all need accessibility. And I cannot gain any accessibility pretty well everywhere in the township of Black River Matheson.
Here, here.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of disabilities, not just the one that everybody sees, which is me. There are people with walkers, there are people with canes, there are hidden disabilities, and our township absolutely fails in this. And our taxes are paying towards the township of Black River Matheson to improve, and they do absolutely zero. And Keith, you said the key to keeping people here is to improve, and you are an accessibility consultant. And I have done that for years. And you need to hire somebody. You need to find that in your budget to hire somebody to do this. Okay. And while I still have this, one thing that I really did not understand is the CAO, Chris, you said you don't have the staff to get people to do grants. You have to hire elsewhere. And you're paying a lot of money. You found a grant for $198,490 for a vendor to replace the public work tanks. When you have a local vendor who will give you tanks for public works and maintain those tanks, which is Co-op Regional, and they also live in Black River Matheson. And why you are not using them, and they are competitive with Petro-Canada or any vendor that you are using. So that to me is a waste of the township and of taxpayers and everybody else of our time and money. That you should be using a local vendor and somebody who services the people and the farmers and other townships. And I could rattle on the other local townships. And you should be looking into that and not wasting our time. Thank you.
So those are three very specific questions. You want to answer this?
Yep. Okay. Okay, so you brought up three things there. The first one's important, accessibility.
Mike?
Yeah. So we advertised for people in Black River Matheson to join our accessibility committee so we could get a firm grasp and understanding. We had no applicants. Zero.
How do you think I'm going to get there?
But you didn't even apply, that's what I'm saying, okay? So I'm not saying that's a bad thing, that was your choice. But don't think for a moment that accessibility is not important.
Folks, let them
Okay.
answer the question, okay, one at a time.
Okay, so the second thing, you talked about grants, okay? So the grant that you spoke of was not an applicable grant. It's a grant that's applied to us through a program in the province of Ontario without application. These grants that require applications, go to the city of Timmins. They have 3 people. They work full-time, and that's all they do, is apply for grants. They have expertise in it. We do not have that. The last issue on the fuel tanks, we have a purchasing policy. That purchasing policy says, when we go to buy something of a certain value, the fuel tanks would qualify, we go to tender. And so everybody has an opportunity to bid, including the local companies, which we hope would submit a tender for that. Just to clarify.
So those are legal parameters that a lot of people don't understand the insurance responsibility. Okay? The legalities are you can't just go to folks and answer, or go to folks and allocate a project, or give a job to, or offer being the successful applicant for a bid, if you will. There's a process you have to go through to make sure it's always equal, and it's a legal process that is not followed, the township will get sued. I think a lot of the stuff you're talking to is really important. That clearly something that everybody here recognizes. And I think if you were listening to the presentation, which I know you were because you took really good notes, I think that's what they're saying. They're saying that they've got a challenge here. The money that needs to be invested in the things that you're talking about is not being invested in those things because other things are not being done, and it's creating a bigger hole that's keeping them away from actually getting the really important things done in this country that you're talking about. So I think in a way you're kind of recognizing that yes, money needs to be spent. The question is, how are we going to pay for that? Again, now you've got 34.5% tax increase, which is starting to try to bring that back in line to hopefully get to where you're going. Do you want to respond back real quick, or are you good? If you're good, it's good. Okay.
Hey,
No, I
Peter?
do want to respond.
Councilor O'Neill just wanted to respond to part of that
Okay.
question. Thank you.
So I'm actually sitting at the chair of the accessibility, and actually when that was put out for people to join, 0 people joined. And so I'm going to ask this even tonight. If you're interested in being on that committee, I would love to have you on that committee. I personally had a sister that was supposed to be quadriplegic, and I look at, she had partial paralysis. So I have a sensitivity to anybody with any kind of disability. I look at when I left my place of employment in Sault Ste. Marie, I actually worked for the government doing accessibility presentations because the government had said that they were going to be funding, so every place had to be accessible by a certain date. It seems like that date keeps getting pushed back by the federal government or the provincial government. I believe it's coming closer in the next little while. So again, if you are here and you're interested in being on the accessibility committee, I welcome anybody to join. And again, I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get anyone. So if you're here tonight and you care about the community, you care about people who have disabilities, come talk to me after and I'll get you to sign up. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Are you, next, sir, okay?
I just want to
Real quickly, so we get the other side.
have any of the council members or staff been trained for customer service policy? That's mandated by the province. That was mandated in 2010, January 1st, 2010.
You guys have an answer to that?
Yeah.
Okay, you want to say?
Councilor Rondo.
I'm a certified PSW, so I have that certification. So. And the answer is yes, one of us does have it.
There's another one.
Okay. You want to introduce yourself?
My name is Karen Lazard, and I'm from Belgagne, and I've lived here for about 25 years. And I've noticed with Matheson that a lot of stuff gets just done for the Matheson town, whereas a lot of times Belgagne, Raymore, and Holtire all get kind of pushed aside, and they don't receive any or hardly any fundings with the taxes thing. So I was wondering, is there a way that it can be more put abroad and stuff? Like we had a $2 million road put in from Belgagne towards Matheson. And there was a beautiful big pile of dark rock there that did not get on the road and stuff. So the road was full of holes and stuff, and they put gravel on it. And now my house and all of the property in Belgagne is at a lower thing because we have dust in our faces all now. So that's kind of a really pain for us. We don't have anywhere to ride bikes because you guys put gravel everywhere. And my other question is, just a quick one here, is because you guys have raised the taxes and stuff, can you split them in between 6 payments instead of 4? Because right now we're doing 4 payments, and there's a lot of people like me who don't have money who have to kind of schedule over finances. Thank you.
Okay, so those are 2 good questions. The first question was more personal in nature. It wasn't really related to the budget, so let's try to keep them related to the budget and budget discussions. Let's not try to air our grievances here with everything else. I know it's hard to do. Second question was a legitimate question in terms of spreading it out.
Actually, that's one of the items that has actually been put forward as part of our strategic plan. I know it'll never happen fast enough for anybody, but I know council in general has requested staff to look into a process. So not only your tax bills, but also water bills, those type of bills will be spread over the whole year, just almost like if you're paying for your insurance by the month. We're looking at some kind of, I don't know what it's going to look like, but that's what a part of our strategic plan as a council. So we put that forward to our staff to find a way to implement that exact plan. It's just not going to happen tomorrow. It's just like a lot of other things everybody would love to see. It just won't happen tomorrow, but it will happen at some point. Thank you.
So also thank Chris to answer that question by speaking to looking at different options. They were talking about even strategic debt to see if that was something that we meant. Sir, on page 8.
Sorry, what about the spacing out the bill?
That's what he said. Yep.
Hi, everybody. I'm Willie Morris from Butler Lake North. I would like to ask this panel, as a taxpayer, are we allowed to ask questions without being harassed?
Yes.
Is it yes? Then
No, yes.
Yes. Then Doug, please explain to me why you sent an email to my wife accusing her of slander.
So
Yes. Anybody wants the email? I have it.
that's obviously a very important question, which is not related to the budget. That's something you need to address with Doug personally.
No, it needs to be addressed here, let people know
It's
how
not a
we,
budget question, sir. I understand that the.
how can we
understand
ask
this-
questions to the panel
Yeah.
if we get a response back like that?
So,
Excuse me, wrong, totally wrong, and everybody in this room needed to hear this.
okay, that's fair. Introduce yourself.
My question is, first I'm going to make a statement. A couple of months ago in a closed council meeting, there was discussed to reduce manpower to save money. This came out in a public setting where people talked about a person working for the town, talked about it with their better half, they're in public with someone else, that there was a discussion behind closed doors about getting rid of a position. And yet, in the budget, you've got that you have a shortage of people. So how do you justify getting rid of a position, but having to hire more people?
Okay, who wants to address that? Just from the budget level, okay?
Actually, I was a little bit, partially confused and partially a little upset that there's actually information from a closed council meeting that would actually be out on the street anywhere. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And I'm not too sure. I can't really address that because if that's the case, there's somebody within that closed council meeting was saying things they should never have been divulged.
100%.
Because that's supposed to be all done in confidence. That's why those in-camera sessions are happening. So that's why I can't even answer. As far as staffing, there's been no changes to date on any of those staffing things that you've alluded to. But we do have people that are off sick and so on and so forth that I mean, those are just HR issues per se, and which definitely doesn't help that staffing issue, which leaves us even shorter staff. Does that answer your question? Maybe not perfectly, but.
So I want to caution everybody, I know it's hard to do because we want to air out a lot of grievances. This is not the place to air out grievances. You have a good question in there. You've asked a legitimate question around, how can you do one versus the other? But you have to appreciate as well too, like I explained earlier, it's law. It's not something the council chooses to do. There are certain information that has to be done in closed session, can't be done in public, and they can't get involved in that. So there's no use asking those kinds of questions if that's there. I think you tried to answer your question. Did you need any more detail?
So what happens to the person that discusses it in public? That works for the town?
Whether that's in a legal position, I can tell you that.
I've got another question. There's been a couple of times mentioned that previous council decided on certain stuff in the past. Who has guided previous council or misguided previous council in the past? And I'll make a statement on that too. As a CAO, the way you treated this lady here is completely disrespectful.
Okay, folks, this whole meeting was not about being personal. Remember, we talked about integrity. You can't attack somebody's integrity. And people aren't going to sit here and watch that. Doug, how do you want to handle this?